Welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, and tonight we're going to go over all kinds of fun things, be able to go through recent extensions from our fearless leader and from the blindside protector of Josh Allen. We're going to be going through what that means for some of the other folks that are out there and that people want to see be able to be re-signed and where everything is going. So it's going to be pretty exciting to be able to uh, take a look at what they have and how that's working and understand where each of those pieces are from a contract and roster construction standpoint. So, really excited to be able to kind of go in, take a look at that, understand where each of those pieces fall. But tonight, we want to be able to share a little bit about our title sponsor and be able to share what they're bringing forward. So, again, for this season, we are ecstatic to partner with our friends at Uncle Jumbo's Distillery and everything that they're bringing forward with all of their offerings. Some really exciting and fun stuff here. And it's something that we're really proud to be able to join with a local group that goes through Uncle Jumbo's here and that not only something fun and to able to be enjoyed like their American vodka, but also when the country needed them to be able to step up, start making hand sanitizer, start going out there and doing all those things. And then getting back to the fun part of it with what we have with all their canned drinks that are in that seltzer category that you see so many people enjoying. You can do a lot of fun stuff here to support a local company and have a great time doing it. So I've had the blueberry lemonade myself. I can't lie, my wife's excited for the orange cream soda when that comes out, and my dad will enjoy the root beer float. So they'll have something for our entire family as it gets ready. So make sure you're going on over UncleJumbosDistillery.com. Again, it's a local company in Clarence, New York, and that's awesome to see local people succeeding and thriving and having a good time being able to share what they do. So we'll talk about them a little bit more as we get going, but it's time to dive into what this is going to mean with training camp opening up and where each of these pieces are gonna fall. And I'm excited about what we have available and what that's going to do from now having our leadership locked up long term. And I think that it's easy to be able to dismiss what that extension really meant across the board with Sean McDermott. And, he came in, and I know some people were not sure exactly what to think, what to make of what he's bringing from a leadership standpoint. Was he too conservative? Was he too focused on defense? What are all the different pieces of what you want to see from your coach and from your leader? And it's something where I, I certainly have been a huge advocate of what he brings and what they're able to kind of show in everything that's there. But it's something where finally having someone who is a legitimate, organized, structured, detailed leader now be able to come forward and get an extension for the first time since technically Dick Duran got one and then got fired within a year later. But for the first time since someone like Marv Levy to have the real direction and voice of this franchise, it's really exciting to be able to see that kind of thing. So, I'm really looking forward to what that brings next. And that I was happy to see him talk about the fact that he's not a finished product and that he needs to see more. And there are several areas that have been touched on as far as what Sean McDermott is evolving and looking at going forward. You've seen some people reference the improvement the Bills have had in passing on first down, in fourth down conversion attempts, in some of the different pieces that show the analytics side of things. But a lot of it is really, people talking about being excited about coming to Buffalo, and that Josh Norman talking about he signed here because he wanted to go somewhere to win a championship. When's the last time you can remember that a free agent signed in Buffalo because they wanted to be able to win a championship and thought that was going to be their best odds? It's just crazy to be able to have that kind of thing. So it's been reported that it was a 6-year deal, but adds on 4 more years. So I'm going to interpret that as that they kind of ripped up this year and next year of his contract and gave him 6 years at the new salary. It was also reported that it was in the upper echelon of coaches. So I don't think he's going to be at that Belichick $12 million range, but I think he probably got more than Matt Rule got from Carolina and is probably in that Mike Tomlin, Pete Carroll, that kind of ballpark. I'm going to guess he got $9 million a year. So God bless him. I think it's fantastic to have a leader like Sean McDermott there and someone who truly can keep the momentum and direction of this franchise going the right way moving forward. So we still need to see more. I want to see, more double digit win seasons. I'd love to see a 12-win season this year. I want to see playoff wins. I want to see consistent division championship contention and multiple division championships. And it's exciting to say that and not feel like it's rose colored glasses or not feel like it's crazy, and that I can genuinely talk about, I think the Bills have a chance to win a Super Bowl, and that's not an asinine, silly statement to make. It's just crazy to feel that way and to be that excited about having someone locked up that I've described as the single most valuable asset in the entire Pagula portfolio. I think Sean McDermott is the most valuable asset that they have under contract in any business that they own. So I'm ecstatic to be able to see what he's going to be able to continue to achieve. I love the approach that he has and that continuous improvement growth mindset that he talks about. I love that he applies it to himself and that we see that kind of benefit going forward. So it's really exciting to be able to see that. And I'm really, really pleased that they were able to get that extension done. Obviously, he talked during his press conference that he can't see himself working with any other GM than Brandon Beane. That is absolutely not an accident. I think they're just waiting to lock those numbers up. They may have different representation from an agent standpoint, so it may not be announced the same day. And I think that they each deserve to have their own day. I expect that extension from Brandon Beane to be announced any moment now. I actually was hoping it was going to be on Friday. So I think it's in the offing. I think he's also going to get 6 years. I think he's also going to be in the upper echelon of GMs in the league, and I think he earns that and deserved it. I also think he could be negotiating on making sure his guys get a pay raise. I think that he's built a brain trust of pro personnel guys, and to have people like Joe Shane and Lake Dawson and Dan Morgan and Brian Gain and Dennis Hickey and just so many guys who I think have a chance to either have been former GMs like Hickey and Gain, or guys who are going to be future GMs like Shane and Morgan, that it's awesome to see someone with the humility of leadership, that he doesn't mind bringing in other guys. He doesn't have to be the smartest guy in the room every time. He's okay having other bright minds around him. And that's why they're able to accomplish so much. That's why they're able to do so many things. So, I think it's a foregone conclusion. I will be absolutely shocked if they don't have a direct connection to being able to have that done in the very near future. I hope it's this week. So we'll see where that goes. On the player front, we saw an extension announced there as well. Our man Dion Dawkins, 4 years, $60 million. That's the exact right number of what it costs to retain a starting left tackle nowadays. I know that sounds like a big number. $15 million a year may sound like a lot to many fans because it is a lot of money. But that's also what guys like DJ Humphrey are getting out in Arizona, and Jack Conklin got from going from Tennessee to Cleveland. It's not as much as Trent Brown got, or Nate Solder, or other players like that leaving New England. It's simply the going rate when a guy is ready to re-up his deal, and there's a lot of players coming up here who are going to set that market even further. So he's still under his rookie deal this year. It's barely over $1 million. Depending on how they played with it, Brandon Beane is very adamant about not having huge signing bonuses and ugly cap hits down the line. He likes to pay as you go. He likes to do roster bonuses that hit the cap in that year. I think we may see a little creativity here. Obviously, left tackle is a more stable position than many others. It's something that you can depend on to some extent. Now the players don't get injured there like anywhere else. But I think that with the weird cap decrease next year, there's a chance you may see some things like a larger signing bonus that he gets now, and then it prorates over this year and the 4 remaining years, and you spread it out over 5 years. Say you do that with 20 million of that, or some bigger number, 10 million of that, and you spread 2 million of it out over each of these years. You can spread out a little bit of the hit, but get him some cash now so he feels good about this extension. I expect there to be a little bit of shuffling like that, and a consciously decreased 2021 um, cap hit with larger ones in 2022, 2023, 2024. So we'll see where that goes, but I'm really excited about it. And I think that as you see more contracts come up, right now it's going to put him in the 7th or 8th highest paid guy. I think that will only go further because, again, that doesn't impact this year. He's still, $1 million player this year. So next year, by the time that happens with free agents next year, guys who get extended, I think that number is only going to look better as we go. So we'll see where those things happen and what comes of it. But I feel really good about how that number is going to look in 2022, 2023, 2024. Each of those years, that's going to look like a very reasonable number. And that's simply the going rate for a starting tackle in this league. So I hope that Dawkins takes another step forward and makes it even of a better value that everyone feels good about. But right now, I still feel good about that deal, and I think it's the right number. The obvious question that comes up is, what does this mean for Matt Milano? And I think there's a lot of folks who are a little fatalist about this and assuming that it means that we were picking either Dion Dawkins or Matt Milano. And I don't think it's that simple. Or that, well, if we want to be able to sign Matt Milano, we have to make a bunch of other cuts. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there will be difficult decisions. Every single franchise is going to have difficult decisions next year. But you also have to remember every single player has difficult decisions coming up next year, because if no team has cap space, or not no team, that's not fair, far, far less teams have cap space to spend, there's not going to be that much money to pay all that many players. So the players have an incentive to sign an extension now and lock up money that they don't know if it's going to be there next year. And you see that happen to other players in normal years. It happened to Quentin Spain last year. He had a good season, thought he was going to get a deal. The deal didn't come around that he thought he was going to get, and he ended up signing for far less money with Buffalo for $2.5 million. Luckily, he played well again and earned an extension here in Buffalo. But I think some players will see some of those warning signs that, hey, not everybody's going to get paid next spring, and that many guys are going to get cut, and you're going to have this supply versus demand issue where if 6 other starting caliber linebackers get cut and Matt Milano's out there, and yeah, he might be one of the best out of those guys that are available, but you have other options because other players had to get cut. It's going to be interesting how agents handle that, how players decide to handle that. So let's assume that he is still the top priority, because I think he is. I think that he's going to be in that same range you've seen Shaq Thompson and Deion Jones sign for, who are both good coverage linebackers. They got between 12.5 and 13.5 million a year. I'm going to guess we give Matt Milano 3 years and 39 million for 13 million a season. If we do that, right now the Bills have about 21 million in cap space, depending on some contracts that are still coming in. There's not a ton of players out there to be cut. We'll get to a few in the training camp preview series here. Obviously, Trent Murphy is the biggest one, almost $7.5 to $8 million we can get right now. That immediately goes to that number, would take it from 21 million to 29 million in even more rollover. Steven Hauschka, TJ Yeldon, maybe Lee Smith, although I think Tommy Sweeney's injury pretty much makes him a roster lock, and Pat DeMarco. Those are really the only players that have any semblance of a chance to get cut that would potentially move that number. Ron in the chat is mentioning Ty Nsekhe. In theory, I guess Nsekhe could, with not having a lot of other tackle depth right now. I don't consider Ryan Bates a passable NFL caliber tackle, but in theory, Ty Nsekhe could be one as well. Assuming none of those guys get cut, with the rollover cap going into next year, the Bills would have $23.8 million. The good news is that's just about all the starting lineup. The only things that would be missing are the return game. We would lose Andre Roberts. We'd probably have a gadget guy. I always joke about wanting Isaiah McKenzie and Andre Roberts to be one human. So the best return man coming out in college would be a big target for me, and right guard. So we'll get to this in a moment, but obviously with John Feliciano's injury, he's also a free agent, and the guy that was signed to replace him, Brian Winters, is going to be a free agent. Also, our cornerback 2 spot is going to be open then. Josh Norman's contract's coming up. Levi Wallace is technically a restricted free agent, but they can put the $2 million restricted free agent tag on him, and we would get a first round pick if somebody offered him a contract, which isn't going to happen. So they can easily retain him. So there's a couple different spots when you add in needing to pay a draft class, needing a starting corner, maybe the draft class is the starting corner, needing a right guard, and Matt Milano. 23.8 million probably isn't enough. There's honestly not a ton of other cut candidates. Brandon Beane's already done a ton of the different contract moves. Star Latule's deal carries over to next year. He is a roster lock in 2021. It costs $11 million to cut him to save $7 million. So you would lose $4 million by cutting Star. So I'll preempt any of the tweets of people telling me to cut him. It would actually lose us money. It's cheaper for him to simply be on the roster. Tyler Kroft's contract expires. Trent Murphy's contract expires. Stephen Hauschka's contract expires. Pat DeMarco's contract expires. Lee Smith would be cuttable next year. TJ Yeldon's contract expires. Then you're talking about the only guys on the 2021 roster that would have cuttable contracts. You're talking about players that would have cap savings. You're talking about John Brown and cutting players like that just obviously have far too much value to be able to cut. So the things that are in place, it's going to take a creative contract to get Milano under there. I think you could do it if you look at that 3-year, $39 million, and instead of it as $13 million a year, maybe you fit it in as $9 million in 2021 and then $15 million in each of 2022 and 2023 when the new TV deal money should kick in and have a pretty sizable jump in the cap. With those kind of things coming forward, I think there's a path to be able to pull this off. I don't think it's a direct correlation that you have to cut Trent Murphy to keep Matt Milano. Obviously, cutting Murphy and getting his $8 million would help. I know a lot of guys in our Cover One Premium Slack channel want to add more players, Jadeveon Clowney or Everson Griffin that just signed in Dallas and other players like that. I would warn that if we cut Murphy, it should 100% only be because we need that money for Matt Milano. If we're able to, they're going to keep a guy like him who knows the system and knows what's going on, trying to upgrade and bring in a guy who'd be in the building for 2 weeks before the first game start to also spend that money anyways on a player. I don't see that as a Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott kind of move. Don't get me wrong. I'd celebrate like everybody else if we all of a sudden got Jadeveon Clowney or got some other available free agent that would, help the team. But I would assume that it would only be because, some of the training camp battles that we'll get to at the end. So I think Matt Milano is still a priority. I think that he gets re-signed. I think it's going to be tight. I think there's a chance it could come next February, right before he hits free agency. I hope that it happens here before the season. One of the other moves I referenced was as John Feliciano's injury happened, and we had some weird cap cuts, very similar to the Trent Murphy cut, about $8 million in savings for the Jets. They released Brian Winters. Winters is a solid player. He's got a lot of starts under his belt, really similar resume to what we got when we signed Quentin Spain and Spencer Long and let them battle it out. those kind of moves I think are great when you see an injury like this. At the time, we cut Spencer Long the next day. A lot of fans were asking, "Oh man, I wish we could have traded him. He was able to, trade so many other players, and we got compensation for Wyatt Teller, and we got compensation for Russell Bodine and Marshall Newhouse, and why couldn't he trade him?" Well, earlier today, Spencer Long announced his retirement, so that obviously helped explain why there was a deflated trade market for to be able to move him. So those moves about netted out. We saved about 2.5 million for Spencer Long. Brian Winter's deal was reported somewhere about 2 million with a cap of 3 million. So I think it's going to pretty much net out. We pretty much gave Brian Winter Spencer Long's money. That's going to be nice. It's going to be able to have him step in. He will, my guess, be the starter from day one, and then we'll handle it when John Feliciano comes back. I'm curious, and it's purely going to be depending on how Brian Winters is playing. If Winters is playing well, I don't think you automatically put him to the bench and bring in Feliciano no matter what. I could see some rotation. They've obviously shown a willingness to do that last year with Kevin Johnson and Levi Wallace, with Cody Ford and Ty Nsekhe. So I think they could get Feliciano back into the run of things by doing some rotation. But I would be shocked if it was simply starting in the day that he got back healthy. But it's nice that we can plug in a guy with, 40, 50 plus career starts to under his belt to be able to step in when we lost Feliciano due to a pec injury. So that's a nice luxury to have. A couple other small moves. You saw a few things that were signed for D tackle depth. Tanzel Smart, who was with the Rams, Justin Zimmer, was a combine darling, put up actually one of the most impressive combine performances in history, legitimately on par with like Megatron and Vernon Davis and Bruce Campbell and the all-time combine performances, even Isaiah Simmons this year. Just unreal numbers for a guy who is 6'2", 300 pounds. So it's never panned out. He's, I think, played 5 career games, but I get it. The teams keep bringing him around for camp invites when you put up such insane athletic numbers for a guy that size. And just to give an example, I think he was 6'2", 300 pounds, ran a 4.840 with 44 bench reps, and all the other explosive jumps were off the charts as well. So just for anybody curious. Getting into some of the pressers lately, I think they've been really encouraging. I love the one today from Heath Farwell. Talked a little bit more about special teams. He talked about how excited he is to sign a guy like Taiwan Jones, and that he thinks they have one of the number one gunner units with Saran Neal and Taiwan Jones. Lorenzo Alexander even doubled down on that, said he thought they had a top 2 unit in the NFL, and depending on if Saran Neal takes another step forward, they could challenge Matthew Slater and Justin Bethel in New England. So Zoe certainly knows that kind of stuff and is able to speak on it to be able to give that kind of educated opinion. So really excited to hear him say that. You could hear Heath Farwell just gush over the signing of Tyler Matakevich, and that saying he is the best special teams tackler in the league right now, and has kind of a just supernatural sixth sense about it, about just not being able to be blocked, knowing where to get, chasing down guys that he shouldn't have the athleticism to chase down, and just talk at length about how excited he is to have a guy like that and how unbelievable he is. So that was really encouraging. You could tell that he was a huge motivation behind that signing and very, very much on board with it. So it's exciting to see what we're going to put forward there, because they talked about with Kevin Johnson and Kurt Coleman and Julian Sanford and a lot of players like that leaving, we improved the depth of the roster, but there's a lot of turnover on the special team side. Our friend Joe Marino talked about that in a recent show, that there's a large amount of turnover in the top 10 guys that played the most snaps. Heath Farwell spoke to that, but he said he's also excited because they added an unbelievable amount of special teams talent with guys that came in who are really, really good. He also spoke at length about Andre Roberts and just how unbelievable his skill set is in aggressively fielding punts, knowing who's coming, knowing when to get the extra yard, all the different pieces, and how smart he is about doing those things. And I know fans get caught up in, wanting that extra roster spot somewhere else or being able to do things, but the trust that we have in Andre Roberts of never muffing punts, never losing a kick return, always never letting it bounce, always catching it aggressively and not losing that extra yardage, knowing what he's doing all the time. It is such an assurance that when you're doing that, and anytime you have that, if your defense plays fantastic and get the team to punt and they punt it down their 50 yards and then your returner muffs it and you basically gave up a 50-yard Hail Mary for free, it's just absolutely deflating for that defense to have to go back out on the field, and it so often results in points for that team. It's just a killer. So it's a kind of turnover like a pick six. It's even worse than an interception or a fumble because you're giving up that huge chunk of yards and putting the tired defense back out there. So I'm excited to see what they can do. And I'm hopeful. I think they were on the verge of breaking a couple plays. I actually will predict that Andre Roberts, we see a touchdown from him in the return game this year. So excited to see where that goes. Got my man Buff Hub in here listening and watching with us. Roberts talked about the fact that he also does all the work at receiver. You guys have to remember also that we had no injuries with Beasley or Brown last year. So I think Andre Roberts was basically John Brown's primary backup and just never needed to use that. So he's never going to be a starting receiver, but I think he's a legitimate sixth receiver. Like I don't think it's a stretch. It's not like Tywan Jones at running back or Tyler Medikevich at linebacker. I think he's closer to a legitimate NFL caliber, roster wide receiver than those guys are running back or linebacker, but he's still the sixth wide receiver for a reason. He also talked about the battle. He called it a great battle between Reggie Gilliam and Patrick DeMarco. I thought that was interesting. Talked about how, Gilliam's prestige as leading the nation in block kicks coming out of college has transferred over, how knowledgeable he's been and the head of all of the rookies for his knowledge of special teams. Did talk about how valuable the experience of DeMarco is, but I will say he spoke in terms and used language that was a much more legitimate shot than I anticipated. I had pretty much already wrote it in pencil that Gilliam would, give him a good run and then be on the practice squad and then just be the obvious replacement for him next year. And that's how it would work out. And I don't know if it's quite that simple. I'm going to say it's still probably 60-40 DeMarco. I think that DeMarco has the lead, but I think Reggie Gilliam might have a real chance here. He's a great athlete. He's much more of that H-back, move tight end, fullback, almost like what Charles Clay was, if, Charles Clay still had functioning knees as a football player. And incredible special teams prowess, which is exactly what you want in that role. You don't want that role to only be a fullback or only be a special teams player. You want someone who can check multiple boxes like that. So I'm really intrigued and going to be watching that one closely. The final one that he spoke about was just the battle at the kicking specialist. And he talked again about genuine 50-50 competitions at both kicker and punter. Constantly bringing those guys out for competition. You can see his eyes light up when he talks about how talented Tyler Bass is. But he also said that, Stephen Hauschka's had young guys brought in every year, and every year he's beat them out. And that's how he's been a kicker for 13 years in the NFL. And this year is no different, that he has a chance to do that. So I think it's a genuine competition. I think that the results are going to speak for who gets that job. I will say that there's a fair amount of financial benefit. There's about $1.6 million this year, and removing $2.1 million from next year's cap. That's $3.6 million that can go in the Matt Milano fund if the rookie beats him out. So I'm not going to say that if it's a dead heat or even that it's automatic that it's Bass, but I'm going to say that I think Hauschka has to beat Bass out, not the other way around. I think that if it's close, they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I also think there's going to be a deflated market of where those things are. So it's going to be interesting where that kicker movement happens. I know some other folks have proposed even that maybe Hauschka ends up on the practice squad and being able to do that. So interesting to see where that goes. And Ron's even asking if Hauschka could be traded. It's certainly possible. I mean, his name is valid. So if you have teams that are desperate for a kicker, you could see that be one of the cut down day trades that he gets back a, late round pick or something like that. And we get the same cap savings. So we certainly would be open to that. At punter, talked about something that I've spoken about quite a bit, and that having the setup of Corey Borwick as being inconsistent, but having really good hang time and the highest fair catch percentage in the league, or least return kicked in the league, was very intentional. Farwell did talk about how he loves that, and that's a strategy. So we still need to see more consistency, but it does speak a little bit to how that was intentional. He also talked again about how incredibly talented Corey Vedvik is, and that he had just an unbelievable leg, and excited about him just focusing on punting now and how he was going to be able to go forward there. So also battling back and forth. If I had to call it right now, I think I would pick Tyler Bass and Corey Bojorquez as the kicker and punter for this year. I'm rooting for Tyler Bass and Corey Vedvik that we have two new specialists for this year. So I hope that we see some turnover there and that we get a positive impression, because honestly, there's so many talented players and depth on this team. I don't want to see special teams be a negative. So I'm excited about the coverage units. I think that we're going to see more progression from some of the pieces we have. Bringing in guys like Taiwan Jones and Tyler Medikevich and AJ Klein, I think will have a big boost to it. Getting Voshan Joseph back from IR will be another boost. I think there's a lot of talent to be able to handle these things. And then we'll see Jaquan Johnson turned into a core special teamer by the end of the year. I think those are the kind of guys that are going to make this really functional and successful. I just hope we have the kickers to be able to make it happen. Getting into some of the camp stories, some fun news that came out late this afternoon. The Bills are actually going to be live streaming the beginning of their camp practices. So you're going to be able, if you download the Bills mobile app, you're going to be able to live stream and watch some of the training camp practice beginning portion. And then I think we will have media coverage there for other portions of it. But I'm curious to see who's allowed to see what and when they kick them out and what kind of reporting that we get. So take a look at that. That message went out to a fair amount of people this evening, but I would encourage you to do that. I think it's going to be interesting to see, and at least we'll get some access to what's out there from a training camp standpoint. With some of the battles, I'm going to try to tie some of these back to each of the players that are there. So obviously we just talked about the kicker and where that money would go. If Bass can beat him out, that can be a nice chunk of money. At defensive end, I think that it's very similar to Devin Singletary last year. I think some people assume that it was a foregone conclusion that Shady was going to be gone no matter what at the end of camp. And I think that obviously it was a strong option, but I think that the performance of Devin Singletary in training camp in the preseason gave them that assurance that they were okay to move forward and they could afford to cut Shady. I think that's what we're going to see at defensive end. So I know a lot of people are excited about the potential of Daryl Johnson, and that I think that obviously they see the physical skill set. He went to a small school. He's coming forward from a different, set of opportunity than a lot of bigger school athletes get. And then he came in and actually got some playing time. Unfortunately, he started out okay and then went drastically downhill to the point where teams were automatically audibling and running right at him so that they couldn't even play him in the second half of the year. Over the last 8 games, he'd never had more than 5 defensive snaps in any given game. Many of them he had 0, 1, 2 defensive snaps. He was simply in there for emergency purposes. So the combination is that he certainly could improve and be ready to step forward with a big improvement, but he has to improve in order to become NFL caliber and NFL roster worthy. So banking on that is that, we can cut Trent Murphy because we have Daryl Johnson, I don't think is a direct correlation. The one that could is AJ Epinesa. If AJ Epinesa is ready to step forward and play a prominent role in his rookie year, that one they will be able to see, because AJ Epinesa's biggest skill set is his power and how he threw around offensive linemen in college. The Bills may not have the most athletic and fleet of foot offensive tackles, but if you're able to have your power translate against Ty Nsekhe, against Cody Ford, against Dion Dawkins, it's real and it's going to translate in games. If that gives them the confidence that he can maybe play 40, 50% of snaps as a rookie, that may give them the assurance that they could move forward and release Trent Murphy. Honestly, right now, with so many players opting out, how valuable depth is in this year's NFL, which will be the most valuable it will ever be. because of how many players could test positive on top of the injuries we normally see. I actually think Trent Murphy, it's more likely that he stays on the roster than not, but I would put it at literally 51-49. I think it's really close to even. I think it's just barely in his favor. And I think if we see a step forward out of both AJ Epinesa and Daryl Johnson, I think it's possible that he could get cut and we could save that valuable money. I would rather go all in on the 2020 season and do everything possible to win a championship. And I don't want to cut a player that I think can contribute just in case on something that they can work out anyways. He can still fit Matt Milano in even with keeping Trent Murphy. I think too many people are talking about it like they're directly connected, that he has to cut Trent Murphy in order to afford Milano, and it's just not that simple. He can do both. So we'll see where that one goes. A sneaky camp battle, I think, might be for that final running back spot, and that the scenario that maybe Taiwan Jones can be a special teams player and the third running back, and you don't have to have TJ Yeldon taking up. He's about $2 million. You could save 1.75 million if you cut him. And that the possibility that, obviously I don't want to bring up painful memories, but we saw what Taiwan Jones did in the playoff game. He's the guy who caught that swing pass after Deshaun Watson broke out of the two players who hit each other trying to sack him in the playoff game. Obviously he can contribute a little bit on offense, and Taiwan Jones or TJ Yeldon was inactive for multiple games last year. Maybe that's a sneaky one that could get shave a little bit of money off there. Maybe you don't need to keep a fourth running back and it gives you flexibility in another spot. Maybe that's Isaiah McKenzie's role that could be kept for a lot cheaper. So I think that's a sneaky one to look at. I think a lot of people are just penciling it in that we have to keep 4 running backs and a fullback, and that TJ Yeldon's automatic, and maybe he's not. Maybe Taiwan Jones can be that third running back in case of emergency, not have an inactive on game day, and just have a practice squad running back you can call up if you get an injury. So just something to watch out for. Obviously, we spoke earlier about Gilliam versus DeMarco. I think we would have had a battle with Lee Smith and Tommy Sweeney if Sweeney hadn't got injured. I think the top 2 tight ends are certainly going to be Dawson Knox and Tyler Kroft. When Kroft came back from injury last year, you saw Lee Smith's snaps go down dramatically. He was playing 40 snaps a game in the first half of the year, and the second half of the year he was playing 19 snaps a game. So I think he's still going to be there. He's still an exceptional blocking tight end, but it's just, I think he's getting to that point. I think this is the last year we have him, and my hope is we can sneak Tommy Sweeney either on PUP to IR or on that practice squad protected list. And then next year, I think Lee Smith, he could replace Lee Smith. I don't think he was ready to do that. His blocking isn't of that caliber yet. And your third tight end, you need to be a blocking tight end. So I also predict that Lee Smith will make the roster this year. If Tommy Sweeney had been healthy, I think there's a chance that he could have given him a run if he made some big steps forward from a blocking standpoint. But right now, I think that Lee Smith is a virtual roster lock at this point for the opening roster. On the defensive side of the ball, some of the interesting ones, I think the defensive line is pretty well set, other than what I talked about at defensive end. I think the 4 defensive tackles are automatic. Now with Starr opting out, you have Ed Oliver. I think Vernon Butler is going to start next to him. We're going to see when Harrison Phillips is fully ready to come back, he could take that starting spot. And then you've got Quentin Jefferson. And I think the Starr opt-out shifted Quentin Jefferson to being even more of a defensive tackle and then rotated a defensive end, although he has that flexibility. Linebacker is going to be interesting because I think your top 4 are absolute locks. You obviously have Tremaine Edmonds, Matt Milano. AJ Klein will start at the third linebacker as well as being the backup for those two, because he'll play like 25% of snaps at linebacker, and those who will play 100%. If one of them went down, AJ Klein would step in there. And then one of the other guys, Corey Thompson, Voshon Joseph, Tyler Dodson, would step into that third spot. I think that, Medikevich is automatic. He's not really much of a linebacker, just like Taiwan Jones is kind of a running back. But he's obviously a roster lock from a special team standpoint. The other piece is going to be Corey Thompson versus Voshon Joseph versus Tyler Dodson. And is that 1 or 2 spots? Depending on the depth in other places, they could keep 6 linebackers. They could keep 5. So being able to review what those options are and kind of weigh where that value is going to be very interesting. We'll see where those pieces lie. I think they go 6. I think that both Corey Thompson and Voshon Joseph make it, and they're both key contributors on special teams, but we're going to see where those things come. I'm curious to see, do they keep 9 offensive linemen? Do they keep an extra? Does Daryl Johnson make it as a 9th defensive lineman if they keep Murphy? Where are some of those things going to come into play? One of those positions could be Corey Thompson gets cut and Voshon Joseph makes it, or Voshon Joseph gets cut and Corey Thompson makes it. I think they'd like to keep 6 and both of them contribute on special teams, but we'll see where that goes. The secondary, I think, is pretty cut and dry now with EJ Gaines being able to opt out. It's now, I guess, Dane Jackson looks pretty solid there as the backup nickel. So you're probably going to have the battle between Josh Norman and Levi Wallace. One will be the starter. The other one will be the primary backup for both the starter and Trey White on the opposite side. Saran Neal will be mixing in some kind of corner nickel combination. Then we'll have Taron Johnson as the starter and Dane Jackson as the backup. At safety, you're going to have Poyer, Hyde, Dean Marlowe, and Jaquan Johnson. I think that's your 10. So we'll see where those pieces, come from and be able to, review what the options are. But I think that's getting pretty cut and dry as well. So one of the pieces that they'll go through to look at that is special teams contributions and future contract implications. There's not a ton of cut candidates in the secondary or at linebacker that would save any money. So I don't think that those would be there. And I know some of the comments that come up in the chat, one of the pieces you have to remember is that Brandon Beane already took that medicine. He set us up with one of the healthiest cap situations in the entire league. It's why he's built what I think is the deepest roster in the NFL, because of how good he structured these contracts. They're not making financial decisions anymore. They're making football decisions. They're going to make the decision that puts the best players on the field in 2020 to try to win a championship. It's fantastic that we have a leadership group that can prioritize winning a championship and not having to figure out what's the guy we can most afford to cut or the least painful release so that we can capitalize on more cap space. It's fantastic to be able to do that. So those guys' contributions on the field are going to outweigh that, and that in some of them, and I think Murphy is the most substantial, maybe the financial part is a tiebreaker if the other guy is there. But if Daryl Johnson doesn't play better than Trent Murphy, then Daryl Johnson is getting cut and not Trent Murphy. It's very straightforward. If Tommy Sweeney was healthy, if he didn't play better than Lee Smith, then he's going to get cut because Lee Smith's a better football player. If Reggie Gilliam doesn't play better than Patrick DeMarco, then Reggie Gilliam's going to get cut because Patrick DeMarco is a better football player. It's very straightforward. There's not going to be some crazy combination of pushing things forward in the future. This isn't Madden. They're not trying to combine the youngest roster in the league because that sounds fun for development. They want to win games this year. Guys who know what they're doing are going to be incredibly valuable. There's a reason that the Bills are talked about so frequently as the most continuity in the league, the most returning snaps in the league, and why that's a huge benefit when there's no training camp, no OTAs, no mini camp, and a weird training camp. It's going to be really, really valuable. So I'm looking forward to being able to see how they piece that together and what they do. And we get to see the first piece of it tomorrow. Tomorrow, that first piece is going to be pads going on and real football getting played. So I hope all of you can join and that we're able to kind of watch some of the streaming that's out there and what's there. I certainly am going to be trying to find pockets of time to check that out. But it's going to be really interesting to see how this team comes together and where everything goes to be able to do it. So I really appreciate all the chat in everything tonight. Ron, Cody, Elliot, really appreciate all you guys jumping in and being able to talk through what's happening here tonight. It's been a lot of fun. We are going to continue on with these. I got a couple fun special guests coming up here in the future, but it's going to be a great opportunity to be able to look and see what this team is coming together and if all the excitement is really everything that we think it is. So I appreciate it. Everybody have good, fun night here. And you've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.